Good evening, my darlings. You've returned, or perhaps you were never truly gone. In this place, we speak of shadows, not stories. We don't seek answers. We summon truths. So, breathe slowly, sit still, and listen. Because what you're about to hear was never meant to be known. I am Lady Obsyren, and this is another step into the dark. I invite you to join me in exploring one of the most chilling mysteries currently unfolding in the shadowed forests of New England. What I'm about to share with you is not a tale from my usual collection of whispered confessions. No, this is something far more immediate, far more present, a darkness that continues to spread through the mist-shrouded valleys and ancient woodlands of our northeastern states, claiming victims with a precision that defies explanation. They say monsters aren't real, my darlings, but what if I told you that the most terrifying monster of all walks among us? What if the true nightmare isn't something that lurks in the supernatural realm, but something disturbingly human? Or perhaps something that was once human. Tonight, I bring you the case of the New England killer, a predator whose methods are so precise, so calculated, that even seasoned investigators refuse to acknowledge what they're truly facing. 12 victims. 12 carefully orchestrated scenes of terror, and a pattern so disturbing that those who recognize it wish they hadn't. But before we delve into this abyss, I must confess something to you, my darlings. This case has consumed me in ways that others have not. For months, I have walked these same forests, spoken with witnesses the authorities dismissed, and gathered evidence that official channels refuse to acknowledge. What I discovered changed me forever. Shall we venture into these haunted woods together? It began in the autumn of 2023, in a remote section of the Connecticut wilderness. Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old photographer, had ventured into the Patchogue State Forest to capture the fall foliage for a Nature magazine assignment. She was experienced, well prepared, and familiar with these woods. Sarah had hiked these trails since childhood, knew every landmark, every shortcut. Sarah never returned from that forest. 3 days later, park rangers found her body in a clearing she had photographed many times before. But something was wrong. Profoundly wrong. Sarah's body had been positioned with meticulous care. Her arms were outstretched, palms facing upward, as if she were embracing the canopy above. Her eyes were wide open, staring at something only she could see. And on her face, an expression of such pure, concentrated terror that the first responder required psychiatric leave. The ranger who found her, a 20-year veteran named Bill Morrison, told me in a hushed phone conversation. "I've seen bear attacks, hunting accidents, bodies that had been in the wilderness for weeks. But Sarah looked like she had seen the face of death itself. And whatever killed her was still watching when we found her." But here's what made investigators' blood run cold, my darlings. Sarah's camera was still around her neck, fully functional. The last photographs she had taken showed the progression of her final hour. Normal nature shots, then images that became increasingly erratic. Trees, shadows, darkness. And in the final photograph, a tall figure standing just beyond the tree line, watching. The medical examiner found no wounds, no signs of physical trauma. Sarah Chen had died of what could only be described as fright. Pure, undiluted terror had stopped her heart. But the autopsy revealed something else, something the authorities kept classified. Sarah's fingernails contained traces of bark and soil, as if she had been clawing at trees. Her vocal cords showed signs of strain, suggesting she had been screaming for extended periods. Yet no one heard her cries in that vast, empty forest. The authorities classified it as an isolated incident, a tragic case of someone becoming lost and succumbing to exposure and panic. But they didn't see what I saw when I obtained copies of those final photographs. In that last image, the figure watching Sarah wasn't casting a shadow, and its proportions were wrong. Too tall, too angular, as if something was wearing a human shape but hadn't quite mastered the disguise. When I had the photograph analyzed by a digital forensics expert, they discovered something that made my blood freeze. The metadata showed the image was taken at 3:47 a.m. But Sarah's phone records indicated she had called her editor at 6:30 p.m. the previous day to confirm she was heading home. That photograph was taken over 9 hours after she was supposed to have left the forest. 3 weeks after Sarah's discovery, the pattern began to emerge. Oh, the authorities would never admit it publicly. Marcus Rivera, a 19-year-old college student, disappeared while walking home from his evening shift at a local diner in Putnam, Connecticut. The route was familiar, a simple 2-mile walk along well-lit residential streets. Marcus had made this journey hundreds of times. He was a responsible young man, always texted his mother when he left work, always arrived home by 11:30 p.m. But that night, he vanished. 6 days Hikers found his body near a creek, 15 miles from where he was last seen. 15 miles through dense forest that would take an experienced hiker hours to traverse. Yet Marcus was found wearing his work uniform, clean except for the dirt from where he lay. Like Sarah, Marcus showed no signs of violence, no defensive wounds, no evidence of a struggle. His face bore the same expression of absolute terror, as if his final moments had been spent witnessing something that shattered his understanding of reality. Marcus's phone was found in his jacket pocket, fully charged. The call log showed no unusual activity, but the photo gallery, that told a different story. In his final hours, Marcus had taken dozens of photographs. Most showed only darkness, flash images of brush, trees, empty forest. But in several shots, there was something else. A shape that seemed to move between the frames, never fully visible, always at the edge of perception. The police never released these images to the family. They were classified and filed away. But through my connections, I was able to obtain them. And what I saw in those photographs still haunts my dreams, my darlings. In one image, you can see two sets of footprints in the mud. Marcus's work boots and something else. Prints that were almost human, but elongated. As if whatever was following him didn't quite understand how human feet should touch the ground. But there was something else in those photographs that the police missed. In the background of several images, if you look carefully, you can see lights in the distance. Not the warm glow of house lights or street lamps, but cold blue points of light that seem to move in patterns, as if something was communicating with signals only it could understand. The third victim was found in Maine. Emma Thornton, a 34-year-old art teacher, was discovered inside her own classroom at Riverside Elementary School. The building had been locked for the weekend. Security cameras showed no signs of forced entry, and Emma's car was still in her driveway at home. Yet somehow, she had ended up inside the school, barricaded in her classroom, with desks pushed against the door. The security footage from inside the building showed Emma's final hours, and they were terrifying. The cameras captured her moving through the hallways at 2:30 a.m., turning off lights, checking doors, her movements becoming increasingly frantic. At one point, she stopped directly in front of a camera and whispered something. The audio was unclear, but lip readers later determined she had said, "He got in. Lock everything. Tell them he got in." But the cameras showed no one else. No other heat signatures, no signs of any intruder. Just Emma, alone with her terror, running from something only she could see. When morning staff found her, Emma was sitting at her desk, hands folded, eyes open. On the blackboard behind her, someone had written a message in chalk. The lesson is over. Emma's handwriting samples didn't match the message, and the chalk dust on the board was still fresh, despite the fact that she had been dead for hours. The janitor who found Emma told me something that still gives me chills. When he opened the classroom door that Monday morning, he could smell something in the air. Not death, not decay, but something he described as the smell of winter in a place where winter shouldn't be. Cold, metallic, ancient. But there were more victims, my darlings. Victims the authorities worked even harder to keep separate, to dismiss as unrelated incidents. Rachel Martinez, a 29-year-old nurse from New Hampshire, disappeared during her morning jog along a trail she had run every day for 3 years. Her body was found a week later, positioned sitting against a large oak tree, hands clasped in her lap, facing east toward the sunrise. Unlike the others, Rachel had left behind a voice recording on her phone. In her final minutes, she had activated voice memo and whispered, "It's beautiful. I understand now. The fear isn't the end, it's the beginning. It's teaching us something important about what we really are." The recording continued for 17 minutes, but the rest was just breathing and what sounded like distant music. Music that no instrument could make. Then there was James Walsh, a 52-year-old wildlife photographer from Massachusetts. James was found in his own hide, a camouflaged blind he had built for photographing deer. His camera equipment was arranged in a perfect circle around his body, all pointing inward, as if documenting his final moments. The photographs on his cameras showed a progression that defied explanation. The entity approaching, circling, studying him through his own lenses. And in the final images, James appeared to be having a conversation with something just outside the frame. As news of these deaths began to leak online, my darlings, a community of investigators began to form. Deep web forums, Reddit threads, TikTok conspiracies, all attempting to piece together what the authorities refused to acknowledge. They called him by many names: the Cold Shore Wraith, the Connecticut stalker, the forest walker. But regardless of the name, the reports shared common elements that chilled me to my very core. Witnesses, those lucky enough to survive their encounters, all described the same sensations. The feeling of being watched from impossible distances, electronic devices malfunctioning without explanation, GPS systems failing in areas they had worked perfectly before, and always, the sense that something was learning, studying, adapting. One survivor, a hiker named David Chen, no relation to our first victim, posted his encounter on a paranormal forum. I was able to speak with him personally, and his account, well, it defied rational explanation. David had been camping alone in the White Mountain National Forest when he woke to find his campsite surrounded by what he initially thought were other campers. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized the figures standing at the tree line weren't. When David tried to take photographs, his camera malfunctioned. When he attempted to call for help, his satellite phone showed no signal, despite being in an area with excellent coverage. He was completely isolated with these observers. As dawn approached, the figures began to move, not toward David, but deeper into the forest, with movements that he described as wrong somehow, like they were learning how to walk. And leading them was a taller figure, one that turned to look directly at David before disappearing into the shadows. David survived his encounter, but David isn't the only survivor. I've spoken with 12 others scattered across New England, all with similar stories, all forever changed by their encounters with something that shouldn't exist. Dr. Maria Santos, a psychologist from Vermont, encountered the entity while researching folklore in remote mountain communities. She described it as a void in the shape of intelligence, something that watched with purpose but felt utterly alien to human experience. Dr. Santos now refuses to practice therapy, claiming she can no longer trust her ability to distinguish between human and something else. The online investigations revealed a disturbing pattern that spanned decades, my darlings. Reports of similar encounters dating back to the 1980s, all dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. But when mapped together, they formed a clear progression northward through New England, as if something was methodically exploring the region, learning the territory, learning about us. The most disturbing theory emerged from a user called Forest Watcher 91, a former park ranger who claimed to have been tracking these incidents for years. According to his research, the entity wasn't just killing randomly. It was conducting experiments. Each victim had been isolated under specific conditions, tested, their fear responses documented in those final photographs and videos, as if something was studying human terror the way a scientist might study a chemical reaction. Forest Watcher 91's theory was that the entity was gathering data about human psychological breaking points, testing how much fear a human mind could process before complete surrender. And with each victim, it was refining its methods. But I discovered something that Forest Watcher 91 missed. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about this case. While researching historical records at the New England Historical Society, I found references to similar disappearances dating back to colonial times. Native American legends speak of the Watcher in Winter, a being that studied human behavior and could mimic human form, but never perfectly. The historical pattern suggested something terrifying. This entity had been among us for centuries, learning, evolving, becoming more sophisticated with each generation of victims. By winter of 2024, the death toll had risen to 12 confirmed victims across 5 states. Yet law enforcement continued to treat each case as isolated incidents. No task force was formed. No public warnings were issued. But those of us who were paying attention knew better. The pattern was undeniable, and it was accelerating. The most recent victim was found just 2 weeks ago, my darlings. Thomas Brennan, a 45-year-old Forest Service employee, disappeared during a routine patrol of the Green Mountain National Forest in Vermont. He was experienced, well-equipped, and in constant radio contact with his station. Until he wasn't. Thomas's final radio transmission was disturbing. At 3:47 p.m., he reported finding unusual markings on trees and signs of large group movement through the area. 20 minutes later, he called in again, his voice noticeably strained. Something's wrong here. The wildlife has gone completely silent. Even the insects have stopped. It's like the forest is holding its breath. That was the last anyone heard from Thomas Brennan. His body was discovered 3 days later by a search and rescue team. Like the others, he showed no signs of physical trauma. Like the others, his face was frozen in an expression of terminal terror. But Thomas's case provided new, deeply unsettling evidence. His body was found posed in the exact position where he had been standing during his final radio call. The search team could verify this because his last known coordinates matched perfectly. Something had kept him in that exact spot for 3 days, positioned like a monument to fear. But that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. In the dirt around Thomas's body, investigators found footprints, dozens of them, all identical, as if the same individual had circled him repeatedly over the course of hours or days. The prints were human in basic shape, but wrong in every detail. Too narrow, too long, with an unusual spacing that suggested whoever or whatever had made them didn't quite understand how human locomotion worked. Forensic podiatrist who examined the scene off the record told me something that I cannot forget. The prints showed evidence of learning. The earliest ones were awkward, uneven, but as they progressed around the circle, they became more refined, more human, as if something was practicing, perfecting its disguise. Thomas's case also revealed something else. His equipment, GPS, radio, emergency beacon, had all malfunctioned simultaneously at exactly 4:07 p.m., but not randomly. Each device showed the same error message: location undefined, signal source unknown. As if something had actively interfered with his ability to call for help. Something that understood human technology well enough to disable it. And so here we stand, my darlings, facing a horror that defies categorization. 12 victims and counting. A predator that learns, adapts, and experiments with human fear as if it were gathering data. The authorities continue their deliberate blindness, classifying each death as an isolated incident despite the mounting evidence. But those of us who see, we know better. This entity, for lack of a better term, is not simply killing. It's studying us, learning our fears, our reactions, our limitations. And with each victim, it becomes more sophisticated. But I believe I've discovered why. Through my investigation, I've uncovered evidence that this entity is preparing for something. The experiments, the learning, the gradual expansion of territory. It's all building toward a larger purpose. The question that haunts me in the deepest hours of the night is this: what happens when it its research is complete. What occurs when something that can inspire pure terror through presence alone decides it has learned everything it needs to know about human fear? Recent reports suggest the entity has begun expanding its territory. Sightings have been reported as far south as Connecticut's border with New York, and as far north as the Canadian border of Maine. It's moving, my darlings, expanding its hunting grounds. But more disturbing still, the survivors report that the encounters are becoming more interactive. Less observation, more direct engagement, as if it's testing its ability to communicate with its subjects. And the most terrifying aspect of all, the survivors, those few who have encountered this thing and lived, all report the same final detail. In their last moments of contact, they felt as if they were being measured, evaluated, as if something was deciding whether they were worth keeping alive, or perhaps whether they were ready for the next phase of its research. So, I leave you tonight with this warning, my darlings. If you live in New England, if you frequent the forests and remote areas of our region, trust your instincts. When the wildlife falls silent, when your technology fails without reason, when you feel eyes upon you from the shadows, don't investigate. Don't try to photograph what you cannot see. Simply leave, quickly, quietly, because I fear that whatever this entity is preparing for, it's almost ready. Because somewhere in the mist-shrouded forests of New England, something is watching, something is learning, and it may have already decided that you would make an excellent subject for its next lesson. Until the shadows call again, my darlings, stay vigilant, stay afraid, because fear is what keeps you alive.